Hello, and welcome to HAI Science on the 7th, our live stream series where we talk with experts on air pollution and health from around the world and try and dissect what's going on with air pollution in different parts of the world. Today, I'm joining you live from New Delhi, India, which is currently a little bit hazy and also a little bit polluted. And we are going to talk about air quality in Europe today, so a little bit further away from India. Hello, everyone, and sorry about this delay. It looks like we had our inevitable technical difficulty that we had successfully avoided so far. So, welcome back again, and thank you for joining us for this live stream, our first this year. And hopefully, this technical difficulty was just, for the one time, and we will continue with our conversation around air quality in the European Union. I have two fantastic guests here today with us, both of whom have been working on air pollution from very different angles and perspectives in the European Union for a long time, and hopefully will explain to us what's going on around air quality changes, policies, and perhaps some hopeful stories in the next few minutes. So, first, I would like to welcome Dr. Ebba Malmquist. She's wearing a lot of different hats. Welcome, Ebba. She is at Airflim, an organization that is trying to translate scientific evidence into policy and influence policy. She's also an associate professor that does research on air pollution and its impacts on newborns. And she's a very active and engaged member of the International Society for Environmental Epidemiology, which again pushes for air quality policy. So, welcome, Ebba. Very nice to have you here. Um, I would also like to welcome our second guest, Mr. Ugo Taddei. He is from Client Earth and has been a very vocal advocate for clean air and has been launching many conversations on air quality and improvements that are needed on air pollution across the European Union and elsewhere. Welcome, Ugo. Thank you both for joining us. And before we launch into our conversation around the larger issues related to air quality in the region, I would perhaps start with how this winter has been. There was a lot of concern about where and how things will evolve due to the energy crisis, but we've seen a very unseasonably warm winter. There have been some air pollution episodes in cities and parts of Europe, similar to what has been the case in other parts of the world. I want to get your sense on the current sentiment around air pollution and health, and also energy choices. What is going on? How are people thinking about these intersections between climate, energy, air pollution, health, etc.? Maybe I will go to you first, Emma, and then to you, Ugo.
Okay, thank you for having me here, Pallavi. Yes, I think this winter has been a winter where we start to talk a lot about energy. It's on everybody's lips. We talk a lot about energy, and it's very interlinked. Both the energy situation we have now, where we have been dependent, some countries have been heavily dependent on fossil gas, and others communities been very relied on solid fuels for heating their homes, and they have not been so insulated. So it's really been a wake up call for energy in Europe this winter. Um, it is also, I think, an opportunity. I mean, if we really work on this issue, we could do something both for air pollution, climate, and energy security.
Great. Ugo.
Yeah, and great to be here, and thanks for inviting me to this conversation. I completely agree with Ebba. I mean, these have been very complex times in Europe with the energy crisis, and they need to make sure that people can heat their houses. But what we need is governments to help people to move to cleaner technologies. We have seen, unfortunately, some governments in Europe taking back steps in terms of environmental standards during the energy crisis, and we think that these are very short-sighted policies, because in the end, what will happen, it will be higher levels of pollution, and these are, we know, levels of pollution that impact usually marginalized and more vulnerable group of population. So what we need is great support from governments in a clear direction to decarbonize our systems, transport, domestic heating, and so forth, because fighting pollution is also a great solution for social justice.
Great. Yeah, I think, the themes around ensuring that the marginalized communities have access to cleaner air, and also that governments really take action and ensure that clean air is available to the citizens and the residents in their countries, has been coming up for a while. And I think this is sort of a really interesting backdrop also to the major policy changes that are currently being discussed in the European Union. We have new ambient air quality standards that have been proposed by the European Commission. I believe we have sort of set of slides that show what those changes are likely to be or what has been proposed, if we can pull those up. And these are now under discussion in the EU Parliament. They're going to be discussed by the Council. And there's definitely a process that will be followed. There has been a lot of sort of thought gone into what these new standards ought to be. So we see here that for PM 2.5 as well as for PM 10, the levels are going to be tighter than they are at the moment. However, they are not going as far as the WHO guidelines. So the current EU PM 2.5 standards for annual limits is 25. The proposal is to go to 10. The WHO guideline is 5. And I'm wondering, where you think this is going and where you think this is going to evolve, how we came up with these numbers. So, Ebba, any reactions to what the EU is proposing to do at the moment?
Yes, I mean, it's one step in the right direction. We, of course, want the air quality limit values to be aligned with WHO. And I think it's important also to note that science is evolving and we are learning new things. And this was synthesized in the review of WHO, where we could see that we are seeing health effects already at comparably lower levels. So if we really want to secure people and their health and well-being, we really need to have an ambitions limit values aligned with WHO. So this is, I mean, and even since the WHO, it's been also new studies, not the least from the Health Effect Institute, which has also shown that health effects are present at very low levels of air pollution.
Yeah, that's that has been a very interesting conversation because, as you said, the studies that the Health Effects Institute has funded, and we've seen the results from them in Europe. We've also seen results from those studies in US and Canada very consistently showing sort of effects at lower and lower levels. And I'm wondering if you can speak to the scientific basis of, how we get to this, like this ought to be the standard for a country, or in this case, for the European Union. What kind of considerations would go in just looking at it scientifically, ignoring for a minute the policy implications, the economic implications, etc.
So if we want to protect health, then we have to look at the studies where we see health effects and at what levels. And this was reviewed in WHO. And the reason that we can see effects is also that we are getting better. We have better exposure assessment, we have better models, better measurements. So we are able to detect these effects at lower levels. And also that we pool together and have these big studies where you really have enough people in the low exposed settings. So that is the scientific part. And then you can pull these studies together and you can see, so at what level can we, with enough confidence, say that we are still seeing effects of air pollution? And that for PM2.5, for example, is 5 micrograms per cubic meter.
Great. And it's always interesting to see that science is but one part of any of these processes. There's often a lot of legal process that happens. There's a lot of different conversations that are ongoing that finally result in what the sort of EU will decide to do. And Ugo, I know you have been doing this for a long, long time, working to understand what the best processes will be, what the best leverage points might be. What do you think the proposal looks like from your point of view? And, in terms of the process over the next few months, what can we expect to see? Where and how will this conversation evolve?
Yeah, I agree with Ebba. I mean, this proposal is a very important step. It is in reality a once in a generation opportunity that we have in Europe. It is not that often that clean air legislation has been updated. So we need now the Commission and the European institutions to do the right thing, because there will not be many opportunities to keep changing it in the future. So now is the time to put the efforts in the right direction. And I must say that a lot of the headlines are around the level of ambition of whether the new standards are going to be aligned with the WHO guidelines. But there is much more than that. We need to make sure that the legal framework is such that whatever standards we'll end up with will be implemented effectively, efficiently, and timely by member states. And unfortunately, the experience with the existing legislation is that governments have been breaching existing air quality standards for sometimes 10, 15 years or even longer. So there are big problems in the implementation. So we're now, from our side, we're putting a lot of effort in making sure that we have guidance on how to introduce air quality plans, on how to assess air quality, on making sure that there are the right incentives and enforcement mechanisms for people to demand protection when there are breaches of the directive. So there's a lot going on now in Brussels and all across the European member states. And now, let's say, is the most intense moment, because the European Commission put forward their proposal that it's a step in the good direction but can be improved. But now this proposal is going to the two branches of the legislative, to the European Parliament, which is basically representatives elected from across Europe, and the European Council, which is basically representing the 27 governments across the European Union. We know that the Parliament potentially will aim for a higher level of ambition. We hope so. In 2020, they issued a resolution calling on the Commission to fully align with the WHO guidelines and to ensure stronger enforcement and access to justice on the directive. So we hope that now the Parliament will keep showing this level of leadership on the file. When it comes to the Council, we know that things are much more complicated. It is usually the body that pushes back in terms of environmental or health protection regulations. But we think that, going back to what Ebba and you, Pallavi, were discussing previously, the science is very clear. So we need governments to listen to the science and do the right thing to protect their people. So to support a very ambitious reform.
Yeah, I think I think it's sort of in many conversations coming back to what the science is telling us, and where we know we have very clear evidence of where the health effects are. But one of the things that has also been very interesting and sort of parallels the kind of conversation that happens at the global scale, where we have a lot of low and middle income countries that are trying to ramp up their air quality monitoring infrastructure, that are trying to get a sense of, what they can do in terms of legal enforcement on air quality action. And we see that play even within the European Union. There are countries, and I believe we have a map of the variation across the EU in terms of PM 2.5 levels. That changes a little bit if you look at other pollutants like nitrogen dioxide or ozone. So we see there are very distinct hotspots in Eastern and Central Europe. And there is an image here from Sofia, Bulgaria, in winter. So we see very clearly this, smog across the city. And the conversation tends to go towards the fact that there are differences in the levels of PM 2.5 and other pollutants that residents in some countries within the EU are breathing versus others. And that conversation can carry forward into this discussion around the air quality directive changes as well. Ebba, I'm curious what your thoughts are on, how these variations really affect the conversations that are being held at the European level versus also at the country level, perhaps, or how the different parts of the EU are working with each other to improve the science.
I think it's a very important question, and it is important to remember that some countries have come further when it comes to clean air, and some are lagging behind. And Alexis, if you could show the map I have, we can see that it's not only reflecting in levels, but of course it's also in reflecting in how many people. So this picture is years of life lost per 100,000 inhabitants in relation to PM 2.5 exposure. So we can see that people in the eastern part of Europe, they are losing more of their lives, more months of their lives or years due to air pollution. And you can see that there are areas where there are cleaner air. So this is a very important. So either then we could say that it's harder for these countries because they already have so high levels, so they should have lower ambition, or we can say that everybody deserves the same right to breathe clean air, and the people that are living in areas with high air pollution have the same right to breathe clean air as people living in cleaner areas. It will mean that they will have harder work to do in the coming years, but we also know that it pays off. It pays off economically, and it pays off in health. So I really want to stress that it is important that everybody has a right to clean to to breathe clean air.
Absolutely. I think that's, that has been a statement that many are making, are continuing to make. And Ugo, I know that a lot of the work that Client Earth is doing is centered around this very idea that everyone deserves clean air. You have been, taking cities and states to court where they're not doing that part. And I'm wondering if you can share your thoughts on how this works if you look at countries in Eastern and Central Europe versus perhaps countries in Western and Northern Europe.
Yeah, I think I completely echo what Ebba said. I mean, we've heard calls from some member states to have differentiated standards in different parts of Europe, and we think that this would be a big mistake because everyone should have the same right to breathe clean and healthy air, regardless of where they happen to be born or live. And actually, what we see, there is also a divide in Europe in terms of level of judicial protection. People in Poland and Bulgaria are systemically refused access to the courts to fight air pollution. even if they're living in the most polluted parts of Europe, they do not have any legal tools to go to court and demand their governments to do more to fight pollution. And that's another part where the proposal can actually improve the situation. There is a proposal to have an explicit access to justice provision, and this will ensure equal level of protection all across Europe, which would be a very important step.
Yeah, that's very helpful to hear. Are there also any provisions, or have there been instances where financial assistance or technical expertise is provided to countries that are trying to still go up that curve of ensuring that they have both the kinds of data they might need to take action? So, what the air quality levels are, in some cases, forecasting, modeling, very technical expertise, and also on the other side of the story, ensuring that people have access to that information and then they can act on it. So within the conversations that happen around the air quality directives, will there also be a component of, this sort of technology or knowledge transfer, peer-to-peer learning, financial mechanisms to ensure that all countries are able to work towards, whatever target is ultimately decided?
I'm happy to go first on this one, as it's quite technical on the provisions of the proposal. Yes, there are. The Commission is proposing to improve the rules on monitoring and on modeling, and we know that a lot of these things are quite technical, and there are different levels of awareness, both in terms of capacity of public authorities across Europe and in terms of also of citizens having access to clear and reliable information. In our experience, it is not only in Eastern Europe. We had to take a legal action against the Brussels government because they were basically playing with the monitoring stations to try to hide the real levels of pollution in the city. So it is, from our point of view, very important that citizen science projects keep happening because they're very good to raise awareness, but also to gather useful information. And the more information we have, the easier it is to see if the fixed monitoring stations are actually providing a reliable picture or if we need to improve the location of the network for measuring air quality, and if there are any hidden secrets that we will need to fight.
Great. And I think one of the very sort of nice or very interesting developments that we've seen in the EU, but also in many parts of the world. And Ebba, I'm really happy that you were able to join us today because you're perhaps one really good example of someone who is a scientist, who's doing a lot of research, but then is also working on the science policy translation and interface, which we really need a lot more of. But we've seen in different pockets around the world, in India, in Kazakhstan, in Pakistan, in Kenya, that public engagement and citizen science to some extent has increased over the last few years. There are new sensors, there are new technologies. People are using satellites, low-cost monitors. We have more forecasting tools. We have more apps that you can use to get information on air quality. And that has ensured that more people have access to air quality data and air quality information. Um, Ugo, if I'm not mistaken, there has been cases where you've used data from these citizen science type networks to also, use as evidence in your legal action against cities and states. And that is something I would really like to get your thoughts on. We've seen more focus on public engagement, we've seen more data. How has this been helpful in getting air pollution the attention it needs? And Ebba, I would say if you can also talk a little bit on how this journey has been for you to go, continue to do your science, but also focus on what that means for policy. So maybe I'll start with you.
Thank you, Pallavi. I think citizen science is excellent. I mean, it's really gets the public engagement. And air pollution, I think, has been quite of a hidden problem. It's not something that we can see, except if you're in New Delhi, then you can see the air pollution. But in many places, it can be dangerous even if you can't see it. So then having this citizen science project where people can actually see, monitor different numbers depending on what the levels are. I think it is very important for the communication side, and it also adds a perspective of all the places where we are not measuring air pollution to make sure that the level of air pollutants are good also in those places we are not monitoring, especially like maybe in schools or in other places. And also very important in low and middle income countries where there are very few monitoring stations. So I'm very happy to see the public getting engaged in this. To the question of me personally working on this, it's been very exciting to be able to jump into this with the Ambient Air Quality Directive. Of course, it's a lot of things that is very new, and especially on the legal side. And I'm very happy to be able to work with Ugo and colleagues on this, because without this, I would be quite lost. But it is interesting, and I mean, we have this opportunity now to do something that really means something for public health. If we manage to get like a really ambitious ambient air quality directive, we have a very big opportunity also to save a lot of lives and to increase well-being of a lot of people. And hopefully, it can also be those rings on the water that can also help to set the good standards in low and middle income countries too.
Um, Ugo, thoughts on the increased public engagement and use of citizen science data and your work and in general, how the discourse on air pollution has changed with that kind of information.
Yeah, I mean, I agree that it's been very useful. We've seen like amazing citizen science projects. Just to mention one, there was one in first in Flanders and then all across Belgium, Creuse and Nozen, where thousands of citizens have been using diffusion tools to measure nitrogen dioxide, and that data has been used to basically explain to people what levels of pollution they're exposed to, but also, as you mentioned, in terms of forcing governments to take action in areas where they didn't know that there were problems. So it's very useful to do that. And actually, if I may, I can mention like the opposite of advice. So I've had a
Absolutely.
journey from being a lawyer and doing something which is really about science. It was something I never expected. So I mentioned the court action that we had against Brussels, and basically it meant that I had to go around in the city with a bike hanging diffusion tubes in certain hotspots across the city, and then sending them to a lab and getting like data that I could use in the court action, which was, I must say, very exciting, because usually we're just sitting in a room and, and typing things at a computer, but actually getting first-hand evidence is something that it's, well, very, very meaningful and useful.
Yeah, I think it's always very inspirational to see people cross over in their fields and try to do what we perhaps lack in other spaces. So whether you're going from science to policy or bringing more science into legal court proceedings, I think we all sort of are working our way towards cleaner and better air. And we always talk about air pollution and the problems we have with it, the health impacts, etc. But there's always also action that's happening that is ensuring that we are one step closer to cleaner air. And I'm wondering if both of you have any examples or stories that you think will give us hope that this is a battle that will continue to fight, and we are winning. Perhaps not all at once, but in small measures. Ugo, I'll start with you and then go to you, Ebba.
I mean, there could be many, but I think for me the best sign of that gives me like some positive energy now is to see that the European Commission finally came up with a proposal to review the directive. We have been calling for this for many years, and finally, the Commission showed the leadership to listen to the WHO and open a legislative file on this vital topic. And I see that with the cooperation between like legal community, environmental NGOs, but also health professionals and all the different stakeholders and actors, including our partners like Ebba and others. I think that we have a very important opportunity to achieve something big on this review, and I really hope that the European Parliament and the Council will listen to the people and do the right thing.
Ebba?
Yes, and I can add on that. I think it's building on this. I think the what gives me hope is this collaboration and the active participation of people from everything from health insurance to lawyers to scientists to the public being engaged, patients organizations, environmental organizations, and also people working in economy, making the science and how much this costs. And yeah, together we are strong, and I think, and I hope for ambitious proposal for clean air.
Yes, I think a lot of people are going to watch this development as it goes through and where we ultimately end up. But I do feel energized, knowing that there are already these collaborations happening, and hopefully there will be more. In fact, we are also planning a workshop in Brussels in May where we will try to bring the scientific evidence together on what we know and where the EU proposal might go in collaboration with ISEE, WHO, the European Respiratory Society, and others. So hopefully that can be another place where we can bring people together from different parts of the union, but also from different fields of work. And in the meantime, I'm, hoping that the people like the two of you that are constantly trying to bring us closer to cleaner air will keep up this good fight. There will be more science, and we will hopefully make progressive action. And Ebba, as you mentioned, this will also be a useful precedent for many other countries that are now going through similar process. They're either setting up their standards or they're trying to revise their air quality standards. So there's a lot that I think is going to happen in this space in the next year or so. But I think we're near our end time now. So I would like to thank you both for joining us and sharing your insights. And once again, apologies to all of you who stayed on for the technical difficulty we had at the beginning. Um, we are very happy you could join us, and we will be back on March 7th, where we will have a conversation on gender and air quality. So please join us on March 7th. Ugo and Ebba, thank you again for joining us, and keep up the good work. That's it from us for today. We'll see you next month.